To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, we'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Trust. Russell Bowers stood on the construction site of his latest project, a luxury apartment complex in downtown Phoenix. At 42, he had built an empire from nothing, starting with a single hammer and a pickup truck 20 years ago, now commanding a multi-million-dollar construction company. His weathered hands, scarred from years of manual labor before he could afford to hire crews, gripped the blueprints as he surveyed his domain. "Mr. Bowers, the city inspector is here," called out his foreman, Carlos Booth, approaching with a clipboard. Carlos had been with Russell since the early days, one of the few people Russell truly trusted. Russell nodded, his steel-gray eyes scanning the horizon. Trust was a commodity he'd learned to ration carefully. Growing up in foster care after his parents died in a car crash when he was 12, Russell had learned early that the world was unforgiving to the weak. Every beating from older kids, every broken promise from social workers, every door slammed in his face had forged him into something harder than the concrete he poured. His phone buzzed. A text from his wife, Marcia. "Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. Love you." Russell's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Marcia had been working late frequently over the past 6 months. As the head of marketing for a boutique real estate firm, she claimed the demanding clients required evening meetings. Russell had met Marcia 5 years ago when she was selling luxury homes to his affluent clients. Her honey blonde hair, emerald eyes, and infectious laugh had drawn him in. She was everything he thought he'd never have: sophisticated, educated, from a good family. Their marriage had been Russell's attempt at normalcy, at building something beyond just financial success. He'd even legally adopted her 2 children from her previous marriage, Jeremy Wright, now 19 and in college, and Stacy Wright, 17 and a senior in high school. Emmanuel Farley, Marcia's father, had initially been skeptical of Russell's blue-collar background, but had warmed to him when Russell's business flourished. But lately, something felt off. Marcia's phone calls ended abruptly when he entered rooms. She'd installed a lock on her home office, claiming she needed privacy for client work. Most tellingly, their physical intimacy had dwindled to nothing over the past 3 months. Russell wasn't naive. He'd built his business by reading people, by knowing when contractors were trying to cheat him, when clients were lying about their budgets. The same instincts that had made him successful were now screaming warnings about his own home. "Sir." Carlos was looking at him with concern. "The inspector?" "Handle it," Russell said curtly. "I need to make some calls." As Carlos walked away, Russell pulled out his personal phone and scrolled to a contact he hadn't used in years, Julian Ham, a private investigator who'd helped Russell with background checks on major clients. Julian was expensive, discreet, and thorough, qualities Russell valued above all else. "Julian? It's Russell Bowers. I need your services. Personal matter this time." The call was brief and professional. Julian would begin surveillance immediately, focusing on Marcia's activities during her alleged work hours. Russell felt no guilt about this decision. In his world, verification was just good business practice. That evening, Russell arrived home to their sprawling house in Scottsdale's most exclusive neighborhood. The Spanish-style mansion, with its red tile roof and manicured grounds, represented everything he'd fought to achieve. As he pulled his black Mercedes into the circular driveway, he noticed Emmanuel's Lincoln Continental already parked near the front entrance. Inside, the house felt different. Conversations stopped too quickly when he entered rooms. Stacy barely looked up from her phone during dinner, while Jeremy seemed unusually interested in discussing his college courses, something that typically bored him. Emmanuel kept checking his watch, and Marcia appeared distracted, repeatedly excusing herself to take work calls. "Russell," Emmanuel said as they finished dinner, "I've been thinking about your business expansion plans. Maybe we should discuss them privately sometime soon." This was unusual. Emmanuel had never shown interest in Russell's business beyond polite conversation. The older man was a retired insurance adjuster who spent most of his time golfing and traveling. "Sure," Russell replied evenly. "What specifically interests you?" "Well, with the market changing, I wonder if you've considered diversifying your assets. Protection strategies, that sort of thing." Marcia shot her father a sharp look. "Dad, Russell doesn't need financial advice." But Russell had caught the exchange. Something was definitely brewing beneath the surface of his seemingly perfect family life. Later that night, as Marcia slept beside him, Russell stared at the ceiling and planned. If his suspicions were correct, if the people he'd opened his heart to were betraying him, they would learn what Russell Bowers did to those who crossed him. He hadn't clawed his way out of foster care and built an empire by being forgiving or sentimental. In the construction business, when you found a structural flaw, you didn't patch it. You tore it down and rebuilt from the foundation up. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Facade. 3 weeks later, Russell sat in his office reviewing Julian Hamm's preliminary report. The photographs were damning but not surprising. Marcia entering the Fairmont Princess Resort with a man Russell didn't recognize, their body language intimate and familiar. More photos showed them at various restaurants, always touching, always looking like lovers rather than business associates. The man was Dominic Reed, 35, divorced, working as a senior loan officer at First National Bank. According to Julian's research, Dominic specialized in high-value commercial loans, exactly the type Russell's company frequently required for major projects. "There's more," Julian said, sliding additional photos across Russell's desk. "This Dominic character isn't just sleeping with your wife. Look at these." The next set of photos showed Dominic meeting with Emmanuel Farley at a coffee shop, then later at Emmanuel's house. In one particularly telling image, Emmanuel was handing Dominic what appeared to be documents. "I managed to get close enough to overhear part of their conversation," Julian continued. "They mentioned something about the timeline and making sure everything's in place before Russell gets suspicious. Emmanuel said something about Marcia just needs to keep him distracted a little longer." Russell's expression remained granite hard, but inside, cold fury was building. This wasn't just an affair. It was a conspiracy involving his father-in-law. The man he'd welcomed into his home, who'd eaten his food and accepted his generosity, was plotting against him. "What else?" Russell asked quietly. "I'm still working on the details, but I think they're planning something bigger than just an affair. Dominic's been asking questions about your business finances, your loan structures. And Emmanuel's been researching Arizona property laws, specifically regarding asset seizure and competency hearings." Russell's hands clenched into fists. A competency hearing would allow them to have him declared mentally unfit to manage his affairs, potentially giving Marcia control over his business empire. In Arizona, with the right legal maneuvering and medical testimony, it was possible to strip someone of their financial autonomy. "Keep digging," Russell instructed. "I want to know everything. Their timeline, their plan, everyone involved. And Julian, be extremely careful. If they suspect I know, it could accelerate whatever they're planning." That evening, Russell arrived home to find an unusual gathering in his living room. Marcia was there with Emmanuel, but so were Jeremy and Stacy. They all looked up when he entered, their expressions carefully neutral. "Hey, honey," Marcia said, her smile too bright. "We were just having a family meeting about summer plans." "Summer plans?" Russell's voice was casual, but his eyes noted every detail. The papers quickly shuffled and put away, the way Jeremy couldn't meet his gaze, the nervous energy radiating from Stacy. "Yes," Emmanuel chimed in. "I was thinking of taking the kids on a trip to Europe. Educational, you know. Give them some culture before they get too old." "Sounds expensive," Russell observed. "Oh, I'd handle the costs," Emmanuel said quickly. "Consider it my gift to them." Russell nodded slowly. Emmanuel, on his adjuster's pension, suddenly had money for European vacations? The pieces of their scheme were becoming clearer. "That's very generous," Russell said. "When were you thinking?" "Soon." Stacy spoke up suddenly, then flushed when everyone looked at her. "I mean, before school starts again." "Actually," Marcia interjected, "we should discuss this later, honey. I know you're tired from work." But Russell wasn't tired. He was energized by the hunt, by the knowledge that his enemies were revealing themselves. He excused himself and went to his home office, where he began making calls to his most trusted allies. First, he called his lawyer, Al Mayer, who'd handled all of Russell's business contracts for the past decade. "Al, I need you to quietly review all my corporate structures and personal assets. I'm concerned about potential legal challenges to my competency." Al was sharp enough not to ask questions over the phone. "I'll start immediately. Do you want to meet tomorrow?" "Yes. Early morning, before normal business hours." Next, Russell called Carlos Booth. "Carlos, I need you to quietly inventory all our current projects, outstanding loans, and cash positions. Also, start identifying which of our employees have the strongest loyalty to the company versus just collecting paychecks. You expecting trouble, boss? I'm always expecting trouble. That's why we've stayed successful. Finally, Russell made a call to Steve Gilmore, an old friend from his foster care days who'd taken a different path. Steve now worked private security for celebrities and wealthy clients who needed problems solved discreetly. Russ? Been a while, brother. What's the situation? I need surveillance equipment. The kind that works in residential settings without being detected. And Steve? I might need other services soon. The kind we don't discuss over phones. Understood. I'll have equipment delivered to your office tomorrow. As Russell ended the call, he heard footsteps in the hallway outside his office. When he opened the door, no one was there, but he could smell Marsha's perfume lingering in the air. How long had she been listening? The game was accelerating. Soon, Russell would need to make his move, but first, he needed to know exactly what he was dealing with. In construction, you always surveyed the entire foundation before you started demolition. But one thing was certain. When Russell Bowers brought down a structure, he made sure it could never be rebuilt. Chapter 3. The Surveillance Net. Russell's office building stood empty at 5:30 a.m. as he met with Al Mayer in the conference room. The lawyer spread documents across the polished table, his expression grim. Russell, your instincts were right to be concerned, Al began. I've found some irregularities that suggest someone's been probing your financial structure. 3 different law firms have made inquiries about your business holdings over the past 2 months, claiming to represent potential investors. But when I called them back, they were evasive about their clients' identities. Russell studied the paperwork. What kind of inquiries? The type you'd make if you were preparing a competency challenge. They asked about your debt-to-asset ratios, whether you have any history of erratic business decisions, if there have been any complaints from employees or clients about your mental state. And have there been? Not that I can find. But Russell, that's not the concerning part. The concerning part is that someone provided them with detailed inside information about your company structure. Information that only a family member with access to your personal files would have. Russell's jaw tightened. What else? I also discovered that Marsha has been meeting with divorce attorneys. Specifically, Trudy Levy at Morrison & Associates. They specialize in high-asset divorces and competency cases. The betrayal cut deeper than Russell had expected. Marsha wasn't just having an affair. She was actively working to destroy him financially and legally. What are my options? We need to act fast. If they file for a competency hearing, you'll be fighting an uphill battle, especially if they have medical testimony suggesting mental instability. We need to secure your assets and gather evidence of their conspiracy. Russell nodded. Do it. Transfer what you can to protected accounts. And now, I want you to prepare something else. Paperwork to revoke the adoptions of Jeremy and Stacy. If they're part of this betrayal, they're no longer my children. AL's eyes widened. Russell, that's a nuclear option. Are you sure? I'm sure. Family loyalty goes both ways. If they've chosen their mother's side in this war, then they've made their choice. After Al left, Russell installed Steve Gilmore's surveillance equipment throughout his house. Tiny cameras and microphones, virtually undetectable, now monitored every room except the bedrooms. Russell had some boundaries, even in war. That evening, Russell's patience was rewarded. The surveillance system captured Emmanuel arriving at the house while Russell was supposedly at a client dinner. Within minutes, Dominic Reed pulled up in a silver BMW. Through his phone app, Russell watched and listened as the 3 conspirators met in his living room. His wife, her father, and her lover, plotting his destruction in his own home. The timelines moved up, Dominic said, spreading papers on Russell's coffee table. My contact at the bank says Russell's been moving assets around. His lawyer's been asking questions. Marsha paced nervously. You think he knows? Doesn't matter, Emmanuel interjected. We're too far along to stop now. Dominic, do you have the medical documentation ready? Dr. Lorna Estrada will testify that Russell's been showing signs of paranoid delusions and aggressive behavior. The incident reports from the construction sites will support claims of increasingly erratic management decisions. Russell's blood ran cold. They had fabricated incident reports and found a corrupt doctor willing to provide false testimony. What about the kids? Marsha asked. Jeremy's already agreed to testify about Russell's violent outbursts at home, Emmanuel replied. Stacy's harder to convince, but she'll follow her brother's lead when the time comes. Russell felt something break inside his chest. Jeremy, the boy he'd raised, taught to drive, sent to college. Jeremy was prepared to lie about him in court. Once the competency hearing goes through, Dominic continued, Marcia will have power of attorney over all assets. We can liquidate the business holdings, pay off the existing loans through my bank, and restructure everything. Russell will be in a psychiatric facility and will control an empire worth over $50 million. And if he fights it? Marcia asked. Emmanuel's voice turned cold. Then we implement the permanent solution we discussed. A man with diagnosed mental illness, becoming increasingly unstable, takes his own life rather than face the shame of losing everything. Very tragic. Very believable. They were planning to murder him. Russell's hands shook as he watched his wife, the woman he'd loved, trusted, built a life with, casually discussing his death as a business transaction. When? Marcia asked. 2 weeks, Dominic replied. The competency petition will be filed Monday. The hearing's scheduled for the following Friday. We need Russell distracted and unaware until then. I can keep him busy, Marcia said. Maybe suggest a romantic weekend getaway. Keep him isolated from his lawyer and his business contacts. Russell had heard enough. He turned off the feed and made a series of calls. First, to Julian Hamm. I need complete dossiers on Dominic Reed, Dr. Lorna Estrada, and the law firm Morrison & Associates. I want everything, financial records, personal histories, any leverage we can use against them. Second, to Steve Gilmore. The situation has escalated. I need your full services now. We're talking about people who are planning to kill me. Finally, to Carlos Booth. Starting tomorrow, implement Security Protocol Delta on all job sites. Unknown visitors get escorted out immediately. And Carlos, if anything happens to me, you have sealed instructions in my office safe. Follow them exactly. Russell Bowers had built his empire by being 10 steps ahead of his competition. Now, he would show these conspirators what happened when they declared war on someone who had spent his entire life learning how to fight dirty and win. The prey was about to become the predator. Chapter 4, Gathering Intel. Julian Hamm's complete dossier arrived at Russell's office the next morning, and the contents were more valuable than Russell had hoped. The private investigator had outdone himself, uncovering vulnerabilities in each conspirator that could be exploited. Dr. Lorna Estrada had a gambling addiction and owed significant money to some very unforgiving people. More importantly, she'd had her medical license suspended twice for ethical violations before relocating to Arizona. Her willingness to provide false testimony suddenly made perfect sense. She was desperate for money and had already proven she'd compromise her professional integrity. Dominic Reed's file was even more interesting. He was deep in debt from his recent divorce, had been passed over for promotion twice at First National Bank, and most critically, had been quietly embezzling small amounts from client accounts to cover his lifestyle. Julian's investigation had uncovered a pattern of processing fees and administrative charges that went directly into Dominic's personal accounts. The law firm Morrison & Associates had been involved in 3 previous cases where competency hearings were later overturned due to fraudulent medical testimony. They were currently under investigation by the State Bar Association. But it was the information about his own family that hurt most. Julian had documented Jeremy's gambling debts. Apparently, Russell's adopted son had developed expensive habits at college and owed money to several bookmakers. Emmanuel had been paying Jeremy's debts in exchange for his cooperation in the conspiracy. Stacy's file showed she wasn't willingly involved, but was being manipulated through a combination of threats and promises. Emmanuel had convinced her that Russell was becoming dangerous and that the family needed to protect themselves. Russell set the files aside and called Steve Gilmore. I need a meeting. Somewhere private. They met at a construction site Russell owned on the outskirts of Phoenix, far from any surveillance or potential witnesses. Steve arrived in an unmarked van filled with equipment and personnel. Talk to me, Russ. What are we dealing with? Russell explained the conspiracy, the planned competency hearing, and the threat to his life. Steve listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. These people have no idea who they're fucking with, Steve said finally. You want them destroyed, I assume? Completely. But I want them to understand why it's happening. I want them to know that Russell Bowers doesn't forgive, doesn't forget, and doesn't lose. What's the timeline? They file the competency petition Monday. Hearings the following Friday. We have 8 days to dismantle their entire operation and turn it against them. Steve nodded. Here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to use their own evidence against them. Dr. Estrada's gambling debts, Dominic's embezzlement, the law firm's ethics violations. We're going to expose everything simultaneously. That's not enough, Russell said coldly. They plan to kill me. Exposure isn't sufficient justice. I'm not finished. Second, we're going to give them exactly what they think they want, but with a twist. They want to declare you mentally unfit? We're going to let them try, but the evidence they present will implicate them in a conspiracy to commit fraud and potentially murder. Russell's eyes gleamed. Explain. Your surveillance equipment has been recording everything. Their planning sessions, their discussion of forged documents, their admission of intent to eliminate you if the legal route fails. We're going to let them walk into court and present their fabricated case, then hit them with evidence of their conspiracy. What about my family? Steve's expression softened slightly. Jeremy's made his choice. He's an adult who decided to betray you for money. But Stacy's different. She's being manipulated. We can probably save her from this mess. Russell considered this. Jeremy doesn't get forgiveness. He's an adult, and he chose his side. But you're right about Stacy. She's still salvageable. Good. Now, here's where it gets interesting. We're not just going to defend against their attack. We're going to destroy them so completely that they'll spend the rest of their lives paying for what they tried to do to you. Over the next hour, Steve outlined a comprehensive plan that would turn each conspirator's weakness against them while using their own conspiracy as evidence of their guilt. It was elegant, ruthless, and would leave Russell's enemies with nothing. There's one more element, Steve added. We need to make sure this sends a message to anyone else who might consider crossing you in the future. Word gets out in business circles, and people need to understand that Russell Bowers is not a man to be betrayed. Russell smiled for the first time in weeks. It wasn't a pleasant expression. That evening, Russell returned home and acted the part of the oblivious husband. At dinner, when Marcia suggested a romantic weekend getaway to Sedona, he enthusiastically agreed. That sounds perfect, he said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. Just the two of us. We haven't had quality time together in months. The irony wasn't lost on him. She was planning to isolate him for easier elimination, while he was planning to use the trip to complete his preparations. I love you, Russell, Marcia said, looking directly into his eyes with what appeared to be genuine emotion. I know you do, Russell replied. And he did know. She loved him enough to murder him for his money rather than simply divorce him and settle for half. After dinner, Russell retreated to his office and reviewed Steve's operational plan one final time. Every detail was accounted for, every contingency planned. In 72 hours, when they returned from Sedona, the real war would begin. Russell Bowers had spent his life building an empire. Now he would demonstrate what happened to those who tried to steal it. Chapter 5. The Weekend in Sedona. The drive to Sedona took 2 hours through Arizona's stunning desert landscape, but Russell barely noticed the scenery. Beside him, Marcia kept up a stream of cheerful conversation about their romantic weekend, completely unaware that her husband was planning her destruction with the same methodical precision he used to construct skyscrapers. They checked into L'Auberge de Sedona, an exclusive resort nestled along Oak Creek. Russell had spared no expense. Their suite featured a private deck overlooking the Red Rocks, a fireplace, and complete privacy. Perfect for what he had planned. This is beautiful, Marcia said, stepping onto the deck as the late afternoon sun painted the canyon walls in brilliant colors. I'm so glad we're doing this. Russell joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. To any observer, they looked like a loving couple enjoying a romantic moment. But Russell was thinking about the surveillance recordings where she'd casually discussed his murder. We should do this more often, he said softly. Just us. No distractions from work or family. Absolutely. We've let life get so busy that we've forgotten what's important. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. She was talking about their relationship while actively planning to have him declared insane and possibly killed. That evening, over dinner at the resort's restaurant, Russell watched Marcia carefully. She seemed genuinely relaxed, laughing at his stories about difficult clients and sharing memories from their early relationship. For moments, He could almost forget about her betrayal. But then she excused herself to take a work call, and Russell watched through the window as she stepped outside and spoke animatedly into her phone. When she returned, she was slightly flushed and distracted. "Everything okay?" Russell asked. "Just client emergencies. You know how it is." Russell knew exactly how it was. She'd been coordinating with Dominic or Emmanuel about their plans for Monday's filing. Back in their suite, Russell suggested they sit by the fireplace with wine. As Marcia curled up beside him on the couch, he found himself studying her face in the firelight. When had she become someone capable of such calculated betrayal? Had she always been this person, and he'd simply been too blinded by love to see it? "Penny for your thoughts," she said, tracing patterns on his chest. "I was thinking about when we first met," Russell replied. "You were showing that mansion in Paradise Valley to the tech executive from California. And you showed up to discuss the pool construction looking like you'd just climbed out of a concrete mixer." Marcia laughed. "I thought you were the most ruggedly handsome man I'd ever seen." "What changed?" The question slipped out before Russell could stop it. Marcia looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" "Nothing. Just wondering if I'm still ruggedly handsome or if success has made me soft." She kissed him gently. "You're still the strongest man I know, Russell." Inside and out. The lie came so easily to her lips that Russell felt a chill. This woman was a master manipulator, and he'd been living with her for 5 years without recognizing it. Later, as Marcia slept beside him, Russell slipped out onto the deck and made a secure call to Steve Gilmore. "Status report," Russell said quietly. "Everything's in motion. We've got federal investigators interested in Dominic's embezzlement, and the state medical board is preparing to review Dr. Estrada's license. Julian's been feeding information to the Bar Association about Morrison and Associates. What about the evidence for court?" "All compiled and ready. The surveillance recordings have been enhanced and time-stamped. We've got their entire conspiracy documented. Plus, we found something interesting about Emmanuel." "What?" "He's been liquidating his own assets over the past month. Cashed out his retirement accounts, sold his car, even put his house up for sale. He's planning to disappear with a chunk of your money after the competency hearing goes through." Russell felt cold fury building in his chest. Emmanuel wasn't just betraying him. He was planning to abandon his own daughter after using her in his scheme. "There's more," Steve continued. "We've been monitoring their communications. They've moved up their timeline. They're planning to file the competency petition tomorrow instead of Monday." "Why?" "They're spooked. Dominic thinks you're getting suspicious. They want to move before you can mount any defense." Russell closed his eyes and controlled his breathing. They were trying to strike while he was isolated in Sedona, unable to coordinate with his lawyer or access his files. "Are we ready for early deployment?" "More than ready. In fact, it works better for us. They'll be rushing, making mistakes. And Al Mayer has been expecting this acceleration. He's prepared counter-filings that will be submitted simultaneously." "Good. Anything else?" "Yeah. Jeremy's been asking questions about when he'll get his inheritance money. Kid's getting impatient. Russell's adopted son was so eager for his destruction that he couldn't wait for the family fortune." The betrayal cut deeper each time Russell thought about it. "Execute the plan as scheduled," Russell instructed. "When we return tomorrow evening, I want to be walking into their trap with our own trap ready to spring." Russell ended the call and returned to bed, where Marcia was still sleeping peacefully. In 12 hours, her world would begin collapsing around her. By the end of the week, everything she'd planned to steal from him would be gone, and she'd be facing federal charges. Russell Bowers had built his empire by being patient, methodical, and absolutely ruthless when crossed. Tomorrow, his enemies would learn why no one stole from Russell Bowers and live to enjoy it. Chapter 6: The Return. Russell and Marcia drove back to Phoenix Sunday evening in companionable silence. Marcia seemed genuinely relaxed from their weekend, occasionally reaching over to squeeze Russell's hand or comment on the desert sunset. Russell responded appropriately, playing the role of the loving husband while his mind calculated the timing of the next 24 hours. They arrived home to find Emmanuel's car in the driveway and lights on throughout the house. As they entered, Russell could hear voices from the living room. Emmanuel, Jeremy, and someone else he didn't recognize. "Honey, I think my dad's here with the kids," Marcia said, but her voice carried an odd tension. "I wonder what's going on." Russell knew exactly what was going on. They were having their final coordination meeting before filing the competency petition in the morning. In the living room, they found Emmanuel, Jeremy, and a woman in her 50s with sharp features and an expensive suit. Russell, Marcia. Emmanuel stood quickly. This is Trudy Levy, from Morrison & Associates. She was just explaining some legal matters to Jeremy about his college trust fund. Russell shook the attorney's hand, noting her nervous energy and the way she avoided direct eye contact. Nice to meet you, Ms. Levy. I wasn't aware Jeremy had any legal issues with his trust fund. Just routine paperwork, Trudy said quickly. Nothing to concern yourself with. Jeremy, sitting on the couch, looked pale and wouldn't meet Russell's eyes. Stacy was noticeably absent. According to Steve's intelligence, she was at a friend's house, deliberately kept away from this final meeting. How was Sedona? Emmanuel asked, clearly eager to change the subject. Wonderful, Marcia replied. Very relaxing. Just what we needed. Russell's phone buzzed with a text from Steve. All units in position. Ready on your signal. You know, Russell said conversationally. I think I'll go to the office early tomorrow morning. Got some paperwork to catch up on after our weekend away. He watched as glances were exchanged around the room. They didn't want him at his office where he'd have access to his lawyer and business files. Actually, Trudy interjected, I was hoping to schedule a meeting with you tomorrow morning. Just some routine questions about your business structure for Jeremy's trust documentation. Of course, Russell smiled. What time works for you? How about 10 a.m.? At our offices? Russell pretended to consider this. They wanted him at their law firm at 10 a.m., probably when they'd be filing the competency petition and serving him with papers. Perfect. I'll be there. As Trudy Levy left and Emmanuel made excuses to follow her, Russell noticed Jeremy lingering in the living room. Everything okay, son? Russell asked, the word son feeling bitter in his mouth. Jeremy finally looked up, and Russell saw guilt and fear in his eyes. Russell, there's something I need to tell you. For a moment, Russell felt a spark of hope. Maybe Jeremy was going to confess. Maybe he could still be saved from this conspiracy. What is it? Jeremy's mouth opened and closed several times before he spoke. I want you to know that I appreciate everything you've done for me. College, the trust fund, treating me like your real son. You are my real son, Jeremy. Biology doesn't determine family. Jeremy's eyes filled with tears, but he continued. I know I haven't always been grateful. I've made some mistakes, gotten into some trouble. But I want you to know that, whatever happens, it's not because I don't care about you. Russell studied his adopted son's face. Jeremy was trying to salve his conscience while still going through with the betrayal. He wanted Russell's forgiveness for what he was about to do. Jeremy, Russell said softly, we all face choices that define who we are. The measure of a man isn't whether he makes mistakes, it's whether he does the right thing when it matters most. Jeremy nodded miserably and fled upstairs to his room. Later, after Marcia had gone to bed, Russell sat in his office making final preparations. He transferred additional assets to protected accounts, updated his will to remove Jeremy and Marcia as beneficiaries, and sent final instructions to his key personnel. His phone rang at 11:47 p.m. It was Carlos Booth. Boss, we've got a problem. Someone broke into the main office tonight. Security says it looked professional. They knew exactly where to find the files they wanted. Russell wasn't surprised. What did they take? Financial records, employee files, client contracts. Anything that could be used to build a case about your mental state or business competency. Did they get everything? Not even close. Most of the sensitive stuff is in the secure files they couldn't access. But they got enough to think they have what they need. Good. Let them think that. Is the security footage intact? Oh yeah. We've got clear shots of the break-in team. 3 professionals, looked like they knew what they were doing. Russell smiled grimly. More evidence for the conspiracy charges. Carlos, starting tomorrow morning, implement full lockdown procedures on all sites. No one gets access without my direct authorization. You got it, boss. And Russell? Whatever's happening, you know the crew's got your back, right? I know. That's why we're going to win. After hanging up, Russell sent a final text to Steve. They broke into the office tonight. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Execute. The reply came immediately. Understood. Justice will be served. Russell Bowers had spent 42 years learning that the world was brutal to the weak and forgiving only to the strong. Tomorrow, he would remind everyone why he had survived and thrived when others had fallen. His enemies thought they were hunting a victim. Instead, They had awakened a predator. Chapter 7. The Trap Springs. Russell arrived at Morrison & Associates at exactly 10 a.m., wearing his best suit and carrying a briefcase that contained copies of all the surveillance evidence Steve had compiled. The law firm's offices occupied the top floor of a downtown Phoenix high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city Russell had helped build. Trudy Levy met him in the reception area, flanked by 2 associates and a man Russell didn't recognize. "Mr. Bowers, thank you for coming. This is Dr. Pat Terry, a psychiatric evaluation specialist." Russell shook hands with each of them, noting the nervous energy in the room. They were about to spring their trap, but they had no idea they were walking into his. "I have to admit, I'm curious about what this is regarding," Russell said as they led him to a conference room. "Jeremy's trust fund shouldn't require a psychiatric evaluation." "Well," Trudy began, then paused as her assistant entered and whispered something in her ear. Her face went pale. "Excuse me for just a moment." She stepped outside, and Russell could hear urgent whispered conversations in the hallway. Through the conference room's glass walls, he watched as more people arrived, men in suits who were clearly federal agents. Russell's phone buzzed. A text from Steve. "FBI is raiding Dominic's bank as we speak. Dr. Estrada was arrested 20 minutes ago. Local PD is at your house with search warrants." The trap was springing perfectly. Trudy returned to the conference room, her composed demeanor cracking. "Mr. Bowers, there seems to be some kind of misunderstanding. Perhaps we should reschedule this meeting." "Oh, I don't think so," Russell said calmly. "I believe you had some papers to serve me. Something about a competency hearing?" The color drained from Trudy's face. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." Russell opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "Ms. Levy, I'm going to save us all some time. 3 weeks ago, I became aware that my wife, her father, and a bank loan officer named Dominic Reed were conspiring to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could steal my business empire." He spread surveillance photos across the conference table. "These photos document their meetings at my house, where they discussed fabricating evidence of my mental instability, forging medical reports, and bribing court officials." Dr. Terry stood up abruptly. "I think there's been a mistake. I was told this was a routine evaluation." "Sit down, Doctor," Russell said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "You're mentioned specifically in their recorded conversations. Something about providing false testimony regarding my mental state." Russell activated a small digital recorder and played a portion of the surveillance audio. The room filled with the voices of Emmanuel, Marcia, and Dominic discussing their timeline and Dr. Estrada's willingness to provide fabricated psychological evaluations. "This is impossible," Trudy stammered. "You can't have recorded private conversations without consent." "Actually, I can. These conversations took place in my home, and Arizona is a one-party consent state. Since I own the property where the recordings were made, they're completely admissible in court." Russell's phone rang. He answered it on speaker. "Russell Bowers." "Mr. Bowers, this is Agent Derek McClure with the FBI. We're currently executing search warrants at First National Bank and several residential properties in connection with a federal investigation into bank fraud and conspiracy. We'd like to speak with you at your earliest convenience." "I'm currently at the offices of Morrison & Associates," Russell replied. "I believe you'll find several of the individuals you're looking for here. We'll be right up." Russell ended the call and looked around the conference room. Trudy Levy was frantically making calls, Dr. Terry was trying to leave, and the associates were whispering among themselves. "Here's what's going to happen," Russell said, his voice cutting through their panic. "In about 5 minutes, federal agents are going to arrest most of you for conspiracy to commit fraud. Ms. Levy, your law firm's already under investigation by the State Bar for previous fraudulent competency cases. This will end your career." "You can't prove anything," Trudy said desperately. Russell played another audio clip, this one featuring Trudy's voice discussing how to present fabricated evidence to make Russell appear paranoid and unstable. "Dr. Terry, you might want to call your lawyer. The FBI is very interested in your previous cases where you provided convenient psychiatric evaluations for large fees." Dr. Terry was already heading for the door, but it opened before he reached it. Agent McClure entered with 3 other FBI agents. "Nobody leaves," Agent McClure announced. "We have arrest warrants for Trudy Levy, Dr. Pat Terry, and Emmanuel Farley." "Emmanuel's not here," Russell informed them. but I have his current location. Russell's phone buzzed with updates from Steve. The coordinated raids were happening simultaneously across the city. Dominic Reed had been arrested at First National Bank as federal investigators seized his computers and files. Dr. Estrada was in custody, along with evidence of her fabricated medical reports. Emmanuel had been found at Marcia's real estate office, where he'd been trying to convince her to flee. And Marcia herself was currently being questioned by police at Russell's house, where they'd found documents outlining the entire conspiracy. As the FBI led Trudy and Dr. Terry away in handcuffs, Agent McClure approached Russell. "Mr. Bowers, we're going to need your full cooperation in this investigation. Your surveillance evidence is crucial to building our case." "You'll have everything," Russell assured him. "But Agent McClure, there's something else you should know. They weren't just planning to steal my assets through fraudulent legal proceedings. They discussed killing me if the competency hearing didn't work." Agent McClure's expression hardened. "We'll be adding attempted murder conspiracy to the charges." Russell nodded and gathered his papers. Phase 1 of his revenge was complete. The legal system would handle the criminal charges, but Russell's personal justice was just beginning. His enemies had awakened something in Russell Bowers that they couldn't put back to sleep, and he was far from finished with them. Chapter 8: The Reckoning. Russell returned home to find police cars lining his street and crime scene tape around his property. The FBI had transformed his house into a crime scene, with agents photographing documents and collecting evidence from every room where the conspiracy had been planned. Agent McClure met him at the front door. "Mr. Bowers, your wife is in federal custody. We found extensive documentation of the conspiracy in her home office, including forged psychological evaluations, bribery records, and communications with all the co-conspirators." "Where is she now?" "Federal holding facility downtown. She's been charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted murder conspiracy, and racketeering. Bail's been denied due to flight risk." Russell felt no satisfaction, only cold emptiness. The woman he'd loved, married, and built a life with was gone, if she'd ever really existed at all. "What about my children?" "Jeremy's been brought in for questioning. He's cooperating fully, providing information about his gambling debts and Emmanuel's coercion. Stacy wasn't involved in the conspiracy. Emmanuel kept her isolated to maintain her innocence." Russell nodded. He'd been right about Stacy. She could still be saved from this mess. "Can I see Jeremy?" "He's asked to speak with you." "But Mr. Bowers, understand that he's admitted to his role in this conspiracy. He's going to face charges." 2 hours later, Russell sat across from Jeremy in a sterile interview room at the FBI field office. His adopted son looked younger than his 19 years, his face streaked with tears and his hands shaking. "Russell, I'm so sorry," Jeremy began. "I never wanted it to go this far. I owed so much money, and Emmanuel said he could make it all go away if I just testified that you'd been acting strange lately." Russell studied the young man he'd raised as his own son. "How much money, Jeremy?" $47,000. "I got in deep with some bookmakers at college. They were threatening to break my legs if I didn't pay. So you decided to betray me instead." Jeremy broke down completely. "I thought it would just be a simple competency hearing. Emmanuel said you'd get treatment, and then everything would go back to normal. I never knew they were planning to hurt you. But you knew they were lying about my mental state. You knew they were planning to steal my business. I didn't think it through. I was scared and desperate, and Emmanuel made it sound like it was no big deal." Russell felt the last remnants of paternal love dying in his chest. Jeremy had made his choice, and it wasn't the choice of a son defending his father. "Jeremy, I want you to understand something. When I adopted you, I made you my heir. I was planning to leave you and Stacy everything I'd built. You would have inherited an empire worth $50 million. Jeremy's eyes widened in horror as the magnitude of his betrayal became clear. "Instead," Russell continued, "you chose to help steal that empire from me for gambling debts. You chose Emmanuel's money over our family." "I can make this right," Jeremy pleaded. "I'll testify against all of them. I'll tell the FBI everything. You already are telling them everything. But Jeremy, there's something you need to understand about me. I don't forgive betrayal. Ever. When people cross me, I don't give second chances." Russell stood to leave. "You're no longer my son. I'm revoking the adoption and removing you from my will. You'll face whatever legal consequences come from your choices, and you'll do it alone." "Russell, please. My name is Mr. Bowers to you now. Russell left Jeremy sobbing in the interview room and drove to see Stacy, who was staying with Geraldine Jacobs, Russell's mother. Geraldine lived in a modest house in Tempe, the same house where she'd welcomed Russell when he'd aged out of foster care at 18. "Mom," Russell said as Geraldine opened the door. At 73, she was still sharp and strong, with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "I heard about Marcia," she said simply. "Are you all right?" "I'm better than I've been in months." "Is Stacy here?" Stacy appeared in the doorway behind Geraldine, her 17-year-old face puffy from crying. When she saw Russell, she ran to him and threw her arms around his waist. "I'm so sorry, Russell. I didn't know what they were planning. Grandpa Emmanuel said you were sick and needed help, but I never believed it. I told him you weren't crazy." Russell held his youngest daughter, his only child now, and felt the first warmth he'd experienced in days. "I know you didn't know, sweetheart. You're not responsible for their choices. But Jeremy and Mom, how could they do this to you? Some people value money more than family. But you need to understand something important. I'm not your legal father anymore. With Marcia's arrest, our marriage is over. You'll need to decide if you want to stay with your grandmother's family or if you want me to remain in your life." Stacy pulled back to look at him. "You're the only real father I've ever known. I don't care about legal papers. I want to stay with you." Russell felt something crack in his chest, not breaking, but healing. "Then we'll figure this out together." "But Stacy, your mother is going to prison for a long time. Jeremy's going to face charges too. Are you prepared for that?" "They made their choices," Stacy said, her voice stronger than Russell expected. "I'm making mine." Geraldine nodded approvingly. "The girl has sense. Takes after her father." As Russell tucked Stacy into the guest room that night, she asked quietly, "What happens now?" "Now we rebuild. We figure out what family really means, and we move forward without the people who betrayed us." "Will you be okay? Without Mom and Jeremy?" Russell considered the question. He felt empty, but not broken. Angry, but not defeated. "I'll be fine, sweetheart. I've survived worse than this." "What could be worse than your own family trying to destroy you?" Russell smiled grimly. "Having no family at all. But now I know who my real family is." Outside, Arizona stars wheeled overhead in the desert sky. Russell had lost a wife and a son, but he'd gained something more valuable, certainty about who deserved his loyalty and who had earned his eternal enmity. The legal system would handle justice. But Russell Bowers had his own form of justice to dispense. Chapter 9, Blood and Empire. 6 months later, Russell stood in the courthouse steps after the final sentencing hearing. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly, but he felt cold satisfaction rather than heat. Marcia had received 15 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted murder. Her tearful plea for mercy had fallen on deaf ears. The judge had been particularly harsh after hearing the surveillance recordings where she casually discussed Russell's elimination. Dominic Reed got 12 years for embezzlement and conspiracy. His banking career was over, his reputation destroyed, and his ex-wife had sued for additional alimony after learning about his crimes. Emmanuel Farley, at 68, received 10 years. He'd likely die in prison, a fitting end for a man who'd betrayed his daughter's husband and abandoned his own granddaughter. Dr. Estrada and Trudy Levy each received substantial sentences, with their professional licenses permanently revoked. Jeremy had cooperated fully with federal investigators and received a lighter sentence, 3 years, with possibility of parole in 18 months. But Russell's revenge against his former son went deeper than prison time. "Mr. Bowers?" A young reporter approached as Russell descended the courthouse steps. "Any comment on today's sentences?" "Justice has been served," Russell replied simply. "People who betray trust face consequences. What about your family? Do you plan to reconcile with your wife when she's released?" Russell's expression turned to granite. "Marcia is not my family. She forfeited that right when she chose to conspire against me. As for reconciliation, I don't forgive betrayal. Ever." That evening, Russell sat in his home office reviewing business reports. His construction empire had not only survived the attempted coup, but had grown stronger. Word had spread through Phoenix's business community about what happened to people who crossed Russell Bowers, and his reputation for absolute loyalty and absolute ruthlessness had attracted new clients and partners. Carlos Booth knocked on the office door. "Boss, we got the final reports from the legal settlements." Russell looked up from his paperwork. "How much?" $32 million in damages from the civil suits. The law firm's insurance paid out $12 million. Dominic's assets were seized for another $8 million, and Emmanuel's estate liquidation brought in $6 million more. Plus, the banks settled for $6 million to avoid federal prosecution for their role in the embezzlement. Russell nodded. His enemies hadn't just gone to prison. They'd been financially destroyed as well. Their families would struggle for generations to recover from the restitution payments. What about Jeremy's trust fund? Liquidated as you requested. The money's been donated to foster care organizations throughout Arizona. Jeremy won't see a penny of inheritance money when he gets out of prison. Russell felt grim satisfaction. His former son would leave prison with nothing, no family, no money, no future. He'd have to rebuild his life from scratch, just as Russell had done at 18 when he'd aged out of foster care. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Stacy entered carrying 2 cups of coffee, looking older than her 17 years, but stronger too. "How was the sentencing?" she asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Final. They'll all serve substantial time." Stacy nodded. She'd had months to process her mother's betrayal and had shown remarkable resilience. "Are you satisfied?" Russell considered the question. "I'm satisfied that justice was served. But Stacy, you need to understand something about me. I don't forgive people who betray me. Your mother and Jeremy made their choices, and there's no path back from those choices. I understand. They hurt you in the worst possible way. They didn't just hurt me. They tried to destroy everything I'd built, everything I'd worked for. In my world, that's a capital offense." Stacy studied her adopted father's face. "What about forgiveness? What about second chances?" Russell's expression softened slightly when he looked at her. "Stacy, forgiveness is a luxury I can't afford. If word got out that Russell Bowers forgave people who stole from him, every contractor, client, and competitor would see that as weakness. My business empire exists because people know I'm fair but absolutely ruthless when crossed. So you'll never speak to Mom or Jeremy again?" "Never. They're dead to me." Stacy absorbed this, then nodded slowly. "I think I understand. You have to be hard because the world is hard." "Exactly. But Stacy, that hardness doesn't extend to people who remain loyal. You chose to stand by me when your family turned against me. That loyalty will be rewarded for the rest of your life." Russell opened his desk drawer and withdrew a legal document. "I've rewritten my will. You're now my sole heir. When I die, you'll inherit an empire worth over $100 million. But more importantly, you'll inherit the knowledge of how to keep it." Stacy's eyes widened. "Russell, that's incredible. But what if Jeremy changes? What if he tries to make amends when he gets out of prison?" Russell's expression turned to ice. "Jeremy ceased to be my son the moment he chose gambling debts over family loyalty. When he gets out of prison, he'll find that every bridge to this family has been permanently burned. He'll be a stranger to us. That seems harsh." "The world is harsh, Stacy. I didn't make it that way, but I've learned to thrive in it. People who betray Russell Bowers don't get second chances. They get justice, and then they get forgotten." Russell stood and walked to the window overlooking his estate. In the distance, the lights of Phoenix twinkled like earthbound stars, representing the city he'd helped build and the empire he'd fought to protect. "Your mother thought she could take everything from me," he said quietly. "She thought I was weak enough to be manipulated and destroyed. Instead, she learned that Russell Bowers doesn't lose. He adapts, he survives, and he makes sure his enemies pay the full price for their betrayal." Stacy joined him at the window. "And now we move forward. We build something better than what we had before. We remember who we can trust and who we can't. And we make sure that anyone else thinking of crossing this family understands exactly what happened to the last people who tried." Russell put his arm around Stacy's shoulders. "You're my daughter now, in every way that matters. But remember, family isn't just about blood. It's about loyalty, trust, and standing together when the world tries to tear you apart." "I'll remember," Stacy promised. Outside, the Arizona desert stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars. Russell Bowers had lost a wife and a son to betrayal, but he'd gained something more valuable: absolute certainty about who deserved his loyalty and who had earned his eternal enmity. In the construction business, when a foundation proved unsound, you didn't patch it. You tore it down completely and built something stronger in its place. Russell Bowers had torn down his old family and built a new one. And this time, he'd chosen the materials more carefully. The empire would endure. The betrayers would be forgotten. And Russell Bowers would never forgive, never forget, and never lose again. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.